Thank you so much, Kennedy, for that wonderful introduction, and many thanks to all of you for that warm welcome. I am absolutely thrilled to be speaking about the most important topic in the world, free speech, to the most important audience in the world, namely supporters of free speech. Now, why is free speech so important? This should go without saying, right? Unfortunately, in today's climate, we find increasing skepticism at best, hostility at worst toward free speech, including in sectors of society that traditionally and essentially have been most supportive of free speech, including academia, including journalism, including publishing, including librarianship, including entertainment. So for this reason, even though, as Kennedy says, I've been a civil libertarian and human rights advocate, advocating all fundamental freedoms for all people, starting about 6 years ago, I pretty much gave up talking about everything else because it became so clear to me that the pressures on our most important freedom were increasing illiberalism from both ends of the ideological spectrum, and that I therefore had to focus on this most important topic. Now, why are you the most important audience in the world? I think it is because, I hope I'm right about this, I think you all support free speech. But I want to take a survey, and I'll let you exercise your free speech rights. How many of you do support free speech? Yay! And how many of you oppose censorship? Yay! Well, duh, right? I shouldn't be surprised by those answers in this crowd. But what may surprise you is your answers are typical. Virtually everybody professes to support free speech. Virtually everybody professes to oppose censorship, even those who are strongly advocating for censorship. The problem is that people distinguish between, on the one hand, professing an abstract, general support for free speech, but, and that is the crucial word, even the strongest proponents of censorship will say, I believe in free speech, but I want to make just one little exception for the one message, the one idea, the one concept that I consider to be uniquely dangerous. And we know that, unfortunately, if you add up all of those just one exceptions, there is no free speech left. Many years ago, one of my friends, who was then the executive director of the National Coalition Against Censorship, Leanne Katz, put this very well. She said, you know, Nadine, everybody has his or her Skokie. And what did she mean by that? She was referring to Skokie, Illinois, a town near Chicago, which in the late 1970s had a large Jewish population, many of whom were Holocaust survivors. And the organization that I subsequently became president of, the ACLU, famously or infamously, depending on your perspective, came to the defense of the free speech rights of a group of neo-Nazis to demonstrate in Skokie. Now, this was a hands-down winner in the courts of law. The case went all the way up to the United States Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court actually said that the Nazis' free speech rights, advocated by the ACLU, should prevail even without receiving briefs or hearing an oral argument. Why? Because this is what the Supreme Court has called the bedrock principle of free speech: viewpoint neutrality or content neutrality. No matter how hated or reviled the viewpoint, the idea, the message, the content of the speech is, even by the vast majority of politicians or officials or members of the public, that is never a justification for censoring it. So it was an easy victory in the courts of law, but in the court of public opinion, it was far from a victory, showing that nobody, or almost nobody, hopefully this crowd is an exception, almost nobody truly supports that viewpoint neutrality principle when it comes to the one idea that they consider the most dangerous. In the ACLU, an organization of free speech diehards, people who care so much about free speech that they pay membership dues to become a card-carrying member, we lost 15% of our members who said, yes, I do believe in free speech, but, and the one exception they wanted to make was for racist and white supremacist speech. So I hope that those of you who said that you really do believe in free speech believe in the version that the United States Supreme Court, to its credit, continues to uphold to this day. But make no mistake about it, it is an uphill battle for us to persuade our fellow citizens to support a free speech culture, right? As opposed to the cancel culture that is too predominant now. Yes, we do have wonderful First Amendment principles that the Supreme Court continues to uphold, but we are not going to enjoy meaningful, robust, vigorous freedom of speech in our society, in our cultural institutions, in our academic institutions, unless we have a robust free speech culture. And that's where all of you come in, right? Most people, when it comes down to it, believe in freedom of speech for me, or people who think like me, but not for thee. And what we have to do is substitute that myopic, hypocritical, inconsistent version of free speech with what many of us think of as the golden rule version of free speech, right? This concept that is a tenet of every major religion. In the free speech context, that means unless we defend freedom for the speech that we loathe, we are not going to have freedom for the speech that we love. And why is that? That's because the concepts that are thrown out there as supposedly justifying censorship for this one idea that we consider uniquely dangerous, these concepts are all inherently subjective. Think about it. Today, everywhere I speak, the most common cries for censorship are on the basis of disinformation, hate speech, extremist speech. All of those concepts are inevitably, inherently subjective. One person's hated idea is somebody else's cherished idea. One person's disinformation is somebody else's cherished truth, and so forth. I could give you countless examples, but one that comes to mind is the fairly recent resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. Many people consider it to be a really important vanguard for racial equality and social justice, and yet Black Lives Matter advocacy has been attacked by government officials as hate speech against white people, against police officers. It's been attacked as disinformation. Some critics have said, well, it's not really about racial justice, it's really about Marxism. And it's been attacked as extremist speech. But conversely, all of those critiques of Black Lives Matter have themselves been denounced as hate speech and disinformation and extremist speech. So again, the point is, if we want to have freedom for the idea that we cherish, we have to extend it to ideas that we loathe, because the tables are going to be turned. And let me give you an example, coming back to the Skokie case itself. There, the ACLU pointed out in our briefs that the very same viewpoint neutrality principle that the Supreme Court invoked to uphold free speech rights for this Nazi, anti-civil rights, pro-racial discrimination, anti-Semitic speech, the very same principle just a few years earlier had been central to courts' protection of exactly the opposite message by a completely different group in another town very close to Chicago, namely Cicero, Illinois. And the speaker there was Martin Luther King, and pro-civil rights, anti-discrimination, anti-segregation speakers in a town that Time magazine at the time described as Selma, Alabama, without the Southern accent. So I want to say that one of the reasons why I am so thrilled about the Free to Speak film series, which I'm so honored to be the host of, is that it collects dozens of diverse stories of speakers with every possible kind of identity, every possible perspective, addressing every possible subject from countries all over the world, different periods of history, really underscoring the universality of freedom of speech, the indivisibility of freedom of speech. In closing, thank all of you for having spoken up in favor of the golden rule version of free speech without the buts. And I want to thank you for continuing to exercise our most important right of all, the right not to remain silent. Thank you very much.